as welcoming cities like Chicago and New York continue to expend more resources to provide shelter and food, job opportunities for migrants in this country. Of course, the argument goes, look, they're being released in this country until they can have their asylum application adjudicated. And it's we're bringing more judges to the border to expedite these hearings, to make determinations, and everything's going more or less swimmingly, no pun intended, according to Ali Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security, and Biden administration officials. Obviously, the most important thing is to be humane, and the least important thing is whatever the law says. But is that even true? Well, ICE has yet to issue court summons for about 82% of the illegal immigrants allowed into the United States after a federal court ordered a halt on the Biden administration immigration and parole program. 82% of those allowed into the country don't even have a court summons.
And they're never going to find them if they do have a court summons.
Tim Scott suggested in that conversation the other week with Tucker Carlson that you have asylum hearing dates that could be as far as 10 years out. So how serious is this system really? For more on this and related matters, pleased to be joined again by Tom Homan, former acting director of ICE. Tom, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what about the way this is presented? We have this process. People come here. They're seeking asylum. The case is assigned. It's adjudicated. There's a determination made. And, of course, the federal infrastructure enforces that determination one way or the other.
Well, here's what the administration's not telling you, right? Under the Trump administration, we stopped catch and release. We kept people in custody that came across the border and made an asylum claim. And here's why we do that. The immigration court, the judges, the average length of stay in ICE detention was about 37 days. So if you're in detention, that's where the immigration courts, that's where they prioritize your case for those that are locked up. So you're in detention for 37 days, you get an order. You're either allowed to stay or get removed. 90%, based on 10 years of data from the courts, 90%, it's actually 87.8 or something like that, of those who claim asylum at the border never get relief from U.S. courts because they simply don't qualify. They're making fraudulent asylum claims. So we detained them. They saw a judgment in 37 days. They got order removed, and we removed them. And that pushed the numbers way down, those that are trying to come and make a fraudulent asylum claim. This administration is not detaining them in ICE facilities. They're releasing them. And they're releasing them because of a couple of reasons. Number one, they know that nearly 9 out of 10 don't qualify based on the last 10 years of immigration court data. They know 9 out of 10 will fail. They'll get an order removal. But they know if they're not detained, they'll be put on the non-detained docket, which would take anywhere from 7 to 10 years. In that time, they can have 1 USC kid, 2 USC kids, and all of a sudden when we do find them and they get order removal, all of a sudden everybody's raising hell. Why'd you remove that guy with 2 USC kids? Well, he didn't have 2 USC kids when he entered illegally. He didn't have 2 USC kids when he was order removed. But he went and hid out and had 2 USC kids. Now everybody wants to say, okay, well, he's forgiven. Let's give him amnesty. He's immune from the law. If the immigration court order doesn't mean anything, let's shut down immigration court systems too. But here's what you need to know. The Homeland Security Lifestyle Report, which the Secretary's very own report, says this. If you're in ICE detention and you get an order removal within that 37 days, you're removed 99.7% of the time. However, if you're not detained and you're released and you get order removal, that 90%, they're removed 6% of the time because they're in the wind. We don't know where they are. So this is why they're releasing them, because they know they're not, most of them won't qualify, and they know if they're released, they'll never be removed.
Oh, this is so this is really interesting. This is really helpful. So it's just a matter of you just talk generally about asylum, but it all comes down to the decision you make, detained and not detained, and then in the latter bucket, the not detained, then it's just basically open borders.
Yes, and if you add one more aspect to it, how many in the last almost 3 years they've released in the United States that the 90%, 88.7% that lost their case, how many have been removed after being issued a final order removal? That number is pretty close to zero. And why is that? Because on top of all this, Secretary Mayorkas has told ICE being in the country illegally on his own is not enough for you to make an arrest. So he's even added a caveat for these 90% that lose. ICE can't look for them and arrest them.
Right. So now it doesn't, the sanctuary cities and counties and states, it doesn't matter because Mayorkas has made the entire country a sanctuary country.
Absolutely. That is exactly why he needs to be impeached. He should have been impeached over a year ago, and I hope they continue down this road. He needs to be impeached. If they can impeach President Trump for making a phone call,
right,
you can't impeach Secretary Mayorkas for violating the federal statute, violating the oath he took, violating the sanctity of the Border Patrol, where he shamed the Horse Patrol, knowing that the facts were different.
Well, what about this new narrative when it comes to, obviously there's a heat wave and people that are coming to this country illegally know that. July and August are the worst times to walk through a desert to try and, sneak into this country. But now they're saying the Texas Border Patrol agents are denying pregnant women water. And I say they by meaning CNN. That was, over the weekend they kept saying, and they're, in this heat wave, they're denying people water. I don't believe that that's happening because, I used to live in Tucson and El Paso, and the Border Patrol agents I met were wonderful. What do you make of it?
I think it's a bunch of crap because the only humanity on that border is the men and women wearing that uniform. I was a Border Patrol agent, so I know. Look, these Border Patrol agents, they're mothers and fathers too. Mm-hmm. They're sons and daughters and brothers and sisters. They don't cut their heart out and hang on the wall when they put the uniform on. They do the best they can. They have saved over 8,000 lives this year alone, and risking their own lives. And now they're attacking Texas DPS. So people are cutting themselves on the razor wire. Well, so you're saying people are getting injured, breaking the law? That happens all the time. Right. But you got to understand the razor wire and the buoys in the river. It's just another reason why someone's not going to take that journey. With some lady with 2 kids, may not cross that river when she sees a buoy, and it's going to be hard to get over. When she sees razor wire, she may not make that trip, which means what? It means less migrants die. They say this administration is humane. Let me tell you something. Since Joe Biden's been in the White House, over 1,700 migrants have died on U.S. soil, a record by far, because when you promise the most vulnerable people in the world, you can cross our border legally. You're going to get released. We're going to fly you to the city at your choice at taxpayer expense. We're going to give you a work authorization. You get to keep that authorization for 7 to 10 years. And when you do lose your case, you're not going to be removed. When you make those type of promises, the most vulnerable people in the world are going to put themselves in hands of criminal cartels to come to the greatest nation on earth. And this is when the criminal cartels, they sexually assault 31% of women. Migrants die every day crossing that river. While we're talking right now, females are being sexually assaulted by the cartels. The more barriers, the more consequence, the more deterrence you put on that border, the less people are going to make that dangerous journey, the less people will die. Secure borders save lives.
My friend's husband, he's from Haiti, and he snuck in here a few times and is still traumatized. He said, you talk about when you see it, women and children getting raped, and then they take them to these houses, and he said it's a whole crazy world down there. But how is it going to stop unless Biden does something now? Even our Democratic aldermen here in Chicago are, when you ask them, well, what can we do? They say Biden needs to shut down the border.
He needs to enforce the law. This can be fixed tomorrow if they just enforce the law. For instance, the federal law clearly says an arriving alien without proper documentation shall be detained, but they're not doing it. And look, the federal courts, the highest courts in the land, have said the Remain in Mexico program was a legal operation. So people can still claim asylum. They're just going to wait in Mexico until their hearing. That way, they're not catched and released in the wind and never to be removed again. There's a consequence. And let me tell you something. Under the Trump administration, we did the Remain in Mexico program. It took about 6 months, and all of a sudden they stopped coming. They stopped coming because they knew they weren't going to be released in the United States. They knew they were making a fraudulent asylum claim, but they're not going to be released in the United States. They will lose their case. They stopped coming. They stopped selling everything they owned to come to the United States, and they stopped selling everything they owned and giving it to the criminal cartels to abuse them. These cartels don't care about these people. If they like during this heat wave last 2 months, a record migrants have died on U.S. soil. You know, the migrants get sick, they get overheated. These smugglers aren't calling 911. They're leaving them there to die. Why? Because they're not worth a penny anymore. So these cartels are ruthless. And if Biden would just enforce the law, put the Remain in Mexico program back in tomorrow, and you would solve 90% of the problem.
Well, they're coming again. And what do you know about this latest caravan making its way through southern Mexico that's reportedly comprised mainly of Venezuelan migrants, along with a small group of African and Haitian migrants, and the relationship between Mexico and the United States on this issue? Compare and contrast it now to what it was under Trump.
Well, Mexico doesn't want to help solve this crisis. Why? Because last year Mexico received over $61 billion with a B, $61 billion in remittance payments from illegal aliens in this country sending money back to Mexico. That's a huge part of the GDP. Why do they want to fix it? It's also against the law of Mexico to transit their country illegally if you're from another country without a transit visa. But they're allowing it. It's against the law of Mexico to traffic in women and children, but they're allowing it. This administration isn't holding Mexico accountable. The Trump administration did. They said you're going to put military on your northern and southern border and stop the flow. You're going to require transit visas and not allow illegal aliens transit through your country. You're going to participate in the Remain in Mexico program. You're going to participate in the third safe country agreements. And if you don't, we're going to tariff you. And guess what? Mexico couldn't come to the table quick enough. And that's why we had the most secure border in my career, because we held Mexico accountable. Not only that, President Trump held Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala accountable. He made them sign the third safe country agreement, saying that if you're really escaping fear and persecution from Honduras and you make it into Guatemala or Mexico, have you not escaped that fear and persecution? You should be claiming asylum in the first free country you come.
Right.
And they all signed the agreement because he told them the same thing. If you don't do it, I'm not going to keep giving you millions of dollars of foreign aid. I'm going to stop it. And these countries are held accountable, and that's why they all assisted in creating the most secure border we've ever had. This administration is not holding anybody accountable. Has this administration said a word to China about providing the precursors that make fentanyl that killed over 100,000 Americans? Have they said China stop sending these precursors to the criminal cartels in Mexico? Have they said anything to the Mexican president about the cartels in Mexico out of control, smuggling record amounts of fentanyl killing Americans? Fentanyl from Mexican cartels have killed more Americans than any war has. Is this president held Mexico accountable? Absolutely not.
He is Tom Homan, former acting director of ICE. Tom, thanks as always. Appreciate the information.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560.